I am Brad Keeler. He is Clint Wood. Coming up next on Director's Cut, you're going to find out what the impact is of having no pro sports teams in Arkansas and why college baseball is so important there. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Director's Cut. My name is Brad Keeler. I'm the director of the Geo Institute, and that is why we call this show Director's Cut. Every single week, except a week at the holidays and during the summer, I sit down with a different GI member who has stories to tell. As I always say, some of them are personal, some are professional, but all of them 100%. And as I also like to say, if we could go more than 100%, we would, but it is not statistically possible. If you don't know anything about the Geo Institute, after you watch this here interview today, use your favorite internet-connected device. Head over to geoinstitute.org. There you will find out so many things about us that you will be able to tell me things I don't know, including that we are a technical society with about 12,000 members, most of whom are geotechnical engineers and or geologists, and that we are part of the American Society of Civil Engineers. And if you like what you see today, and we wouldn't have asked Clint on the show if we thought he was going to be boring. Let's be honest. You should click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. Coming to us all the way from Fayetteville, Arkansas. Or what's the other way to say it?
Fayetteville is kind of old school way. So.
Where he is a faculty member at the University of Arkansas. It is Clint Wood. Clint, thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
We're going to have a good time today. I can always guarantee that. We have 10 questions, same as we do every week, and 2 of them are the same that we ask everybody every week, and we must, as is tradition, begin with one of those. Describe your job in 45 seconds.
So I'm a professor of civil engineering at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. And I do research, teaching, and service activities. So teaching, I teach civil engineering, geotechnical engineering courses. Research, I do geotechnical earthquake engineering and infrastructure evaluation, mostly in the kind of subsurface imaging area. And then service, service to university, service to professional organizations like GI. And I think that's an interesting thing because, one of the things when I was an undergrad, I didn't have any clue what professors did. That was always a unique deal that I sit there and learned along my graduate studies of kind of what professors do.
And I think, as you go on, you think about a lot of different stuff. One thing that never occurred to me, I think I really believed that every semester the professor kind of started from scratch with the planning of the course and how they were going to teach it and the reading materials and everything. And now, I realize that would be absolutely insane. So I'm not going to ask you about that. But as someone who's several years into this right now, I'm going to ask you a related question. How do you keep it fresh every semester? Like, how do you go about incorporating new material and making sure that it's not just the same old thing every single time?
It's tougher for undergrad classes because we kind of teach older material in those cases or more set structure in those. Graduate class, it's a little bit easier, especially in like earthquake engineering because the code is changing so often. Okay. So you've got to update a lot of those things. You can update how you did. I get new data a lot of times in things. So, my classes, I use like real world examples from some of our research. So I find better examples and I can throw them in and say, hey, you guys analyze this. This is like real data we collected.
Oh, that's fantastic. Clint Wood, keeping it fresh for the grad students. So as we record this, it is the first day of December. And around the world, that means people are putting up or have put up already holiday decorations. Just above me, there are two trees that are kind of sort of decorated. We might have some more stuff to put on them, and the yard stuff needs to go out. It's a process. Clint, what is the earliest acceptable date to put up holiday decorations or listen to Christmas music?
For me, I subscribe to the kind of typical after Thanksgiving. That's generally when we're working on things. We're Friday after Thanksgiving, over the weekend, and then kind of into the next week is trying to get things fully together and decorated, the Christmas tree up. So.
And you've got harmony on this in your house? Like there's nobody with any dissenting voices? My daughter starts with her Spotify Christmas mix or whatever. I feel like it's July, but it's probably a little later than that. Everybody at your place is kind of on the same page about this?
We all get along. Now, Christmas shopping can start before then. So, there's you can get a month or more before Thanksgiving to start Christmas shopping.
I feel like if anybody's ever been, well, I guess really it's just the US and Canada where there's Thanksgiving, so you don't have to worry about this anywhere else. But if you go to other countries in the world, there's nothing holding anybody back from putting up Christmas decorations. And I know in the Philippines, at least, I don't know about the rest of Southeast Asia, they refer to them as the months of Burr. September, October, November, and December, and that is when you decorate for Christmas. So September 1st, it's fair game in the Philippines to put up Christmas decorations. So maybe that's not such a good jibe with you and your after Thanksgiving thing. The third question is always the research question. And I always get a little bit excited when we're going to talk about something that we haven't talked about in a while on Director's Cut. And we're hitting it today. Subsurface imaging. I hope that there are people out there who do get legitimately excited when we talk about the research stuff. I'm sure there are. Clint, you specifically want to talk a little bit about the future of subsurface imaging and how this is impacting your work. So have at it, my friend.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When I first started kind of in the world of subsurface imaging or non-invasive evaluations, everything was pretty much 1D. That's what we were doing. We started off with SASW, and we've slowly morphed to MASW and other methods in those cases. And now we're getting strongly into the 2D images. So how can we create 2D images and recover real properties in those cases? And that's some of the things that we're working on right now, are new methods in order to better characterize these 2D images, so lines in those cases. And, it's always, compared to the medical industry. And although the medical industry often has an easier time because they can basically have a 3D, so they can measure from multiple places, send waves or other things from multiple angles, but we're limited usually by the surface in that case. So one area that we can input and output waves if we don't have any kind of borehole. But, we're moving towards the ability to sit there and see these images faster. So that's one of the things that I think we're improving upon, is how quickly can we sit there and generate these images. And that's often what I see in the future, because, most of us have been, older, have been in ultrasounds when our wives are pregnant or when they're pregnant. And, it's interesting to see that image like real time. And you can start to see what they're looking at, see the things on the screen that they're interested in or trying to show you. And hopefully one of these days we kind of get to that point. Right now you have to have a really good understanding of what you're seeing. Even with electromagnetic methods like GPR, you have to have a good idea on the screen of what you're looking at. Or for surface wave methods, you have to have a good idea of what you're looking at in order to try to glean some information out of it. But you definitely don't get a 2D image just right off the bat. You're not sitting there like the CSI shows and they're sitting there generating a beautiful image of something in the subsurface right when they're doing it. That's not.
So wait a
really,
minute. You mean to tell me that when you look at the screen, you can't just say, I'm going to enhance it and click, and it
yeah.
magically becomes so much clearer and three-dimensional?
Yeah, we're not quite there, uh, but we're working on imaging methods and inversion methods that sit there and allow us to solve these things. And a lot of the tools are like AI, like everybody else is using in engineering or around the world. Is how can we use AI to better image or create these or process these things more quickly in order to generate useful images for projects, because that's always a quick timeline, especially if it's a problematic issue. Let's say there's a void or there's a potential area that's sinking or something else that you need to rapidly evaluate. Then being able to generate those images more quickly and get useful data into decision makers' hands is very powerful in those cases.
So you kind of got to one of my follow-up questions on its own by talking about the medical industry, right? And I always think, with new technologies, it's really just the money that's going to drive it, or drive its early adoption at least. And so in
Yep.
this case, you've got the medical field, but you also probably, it's somewhat tangential, I guess, to our world, is oil and gas, right?
Yep.
And there's tons of money being poured into this for a very, very direct final goal. I While you can kind of sit downstream and reap some of the benefits from that, it's got to be a little bit frustrating to see these other fields with this and feel like what you're doing is just as valuable. And why do you have to wait for some of this stuff to hit the civil world, right?
Yeah. And we do sit there and take a lot of the things from the oil and gas industry. I mean, a lot of the sensors that we use, a lot of the data acquisition we use was initially built from the oil industry, just like the Vibra-size truck that I sit there and use to shake the ground. That was an oil industry development. So we sit there and use a lot of that technology in those cases. But it is tougher because the budgets aren't always there on projects to sit there and do a significant amount of work in these projects. That we're often trying to characterize the soil well enough to recommend foundation designs, recommend whatever designs we're coming up for civil infrastructure. And that's kind of the goal, just enough to make it happen and make it work and not have problems with your building.
I think my last follow-up on this one, have you seen any advances from other industries that were kind of surprising to you? Maybe places that you wouldn't think of as traditionally using this technology. Again, same daughter that listens to Christmas music half the year, loves a lot of, she's a history kid too. And so she watches a lot of the ancient Egypt stuff, and there's a lot of this technology is being used in archaeology currently for some of the same kinds of things, but a little less expectant for me, I guess, than a field, again, like oil and gas or medical. Are there any oddball things that you've seen from other parts of the world using GPR or some other technology?
One of the interesting things is like utility location that I found interesting to start out with, that GPR is used heavily for utility location, which is a less of a, I guess, use what I would think of, but I mean, very useful. But in those kind of semi-tangential field, that's still kind of in the same area.
I like that. Perfect. We're going to get back to some of the fun questions now, and we've got a couple about Arkansas coming up here. You're only our second guest ever from Arkansas. We had Michelle Berry on way back at the beginning of the show in season 1, so it's kind of unbelievable that it's taken us this long to get back to, is it the Diamond State? Is that Arkansas?
Yep.
Look at that.
Only diamond producing mine in the U.S.,
So it's taken us a long time to get back to the Diamond State. We got to talk to you a little bit. I think one of the sad things about America in 2025 is that this could go a lot of different directions when you start a sentence that way. But I'm going to say a very simple one. Regional accents, almost a thing of the past, right? people listening to you can tell you've still got one, which is cool. That's exciting. But I want to know, Clint, what is the most Arkansas thing that you say, either a word or a phrase?
Well, besides just my general accent in those cases, one of the most unique things in Arkansas is just woo pig suey. That, that's kind of a call across the deal, or calling the hogs in that case. I don't think you're going to go anyplace else in the nation, and somebody that's, watches sports and not kind of understand what that is and connect it directly to Arkansas in that case. That we're pretty unique in terms of a mascot, that nobody else has a Razorback. So I think Arkansas is pretty unique in that case, and that's kind of the unique saying, I guess, that I can come up with.
And everybody in their region, I think, has places on the map that are not pronounced the way that they look and that the rest of the world might think they are spelled or pronounced. One good example, in Virginia, we have a city that's called Buena Vista and not Buena Vista. So if anybody ever visits there, it's Buena, just so you know. My grandfather was born in Arkansas and lived there until he was 10 years old in a town called Paragould, that is spelled Paragold, that is in the northeastern part of the state. We talked about Fayetteville right at the beginning. Do you have any others, Clint, that you can share with the people?
There's interesting kind of, I guess, pronunciations in those cases that, a lot of the ones around here aren't too bad. I mean, they're easier to sit there and say that, we've got a lot of unique towns, I guess, that have sister cities in those cases. That Paris, Arkansas, you think of all the ones that, always get people confused, where they sit there and say where they're from, and they don't always associate that with Arkansas in those cases. So
I had a great idea for a reality show back when reality shows became a big thing, that for cities that had the same name, you would take half of the residents and swap them. And so with Paris, the original one was going to be Paris, Texas. You'd take half the population of Paris, Texas, and send them to France, and half the population of Paris, France, and send them to Texas, Cleveland, Mississippi, and Cleveland, Ohio, Athens, Georgia, and Athens, Greece. This was going to be the best reality show that ever aired on TV. Sadly, nobody wanted to make it. We have one more Arkansas question, as I said at the beginning, and this is the one we teased up at the front. You've no professional sports teams in Arkansas, and my son goes to West Virginia University. There are no pro sports teams in West Virginia. WVU sports are a big deal in that state. What is the impact, Clint, of no pro sports teams in Arkansas?
I think it's one of the unique things that everybody in the state, so all corners of the state, can sit there and kind of come together to root for Arkansas in that case. That no matter which area you're on, you're kind of associated with Arkansas. And I also think it helps with the university in terms of transplants that come in. They can associate themselves with Arkansas without actually going to Arkansas. That's kind of the sports team that you can support in those cases, and it creates a very unique fan base where there's not as much, I guess, splitting in those cases. And if you want to watch, college baseball, you can really get into that. And, we typically have a very good fan base that travels across the state. And I think that's one of the unique things, too, is people come up from Little Rock, which is about a 3-hour drive, up to watch the games in those cases. So pretty powerful as far as like across the board, unique university and being able to pull in fans from the entire state.
So let's talk college baseball for a minute, because we don't often get to do this on Director's Cut. And I love college baseball. It's been a long time since we've talked about it on the show. It's a unique experience. It's very, very different from a major league game. If people haven't been, obviously it's the same thing on the field. You got 9 innings, you have 9 players, and the positions are the same. So if anybody's sitting here thinking, how is it different? It's none of that stuff. Clint, what would you say to somebody are the best things about going to college baseball if somebody hasn't been before?
I think it's sometimes just the stadiums and the fan base that you get into and the uniqueness of the players that are coming in and playing in those cases, the athletes that you sit there and see, and you get to see them from a very young perspective. You know, a lot of times people coming into the pros, you know them as college baseball players or you've seen them years before. And oftentimes when we start talking about great players on college baseball teams, this is the first time people have kind of seen them and seen how great they can be in that case. And then there's always the unique cheers and things that come up with Arkansas fans and other college baseball fans and the rivalries that go with that. And I always find it interesting the differences between stadiums. Like if you look at Major League Baseball, I mean, there's differences in the stadiums, but there's not like an order of magnitude difference in the size of stadiums. Within college baseball, easily, you know, and that's counting like Division I schools that, you know, there's an order of magnitude difference between some schools and others as far as attendance to college baseball games. So I think that's cool about the unique, I guess, Arkansas, because we have a very big fan base. I mean, we probably have 20,000 people that attend a Arkansas baseball game. So compared to other small schools. So we're lucky to be kind of in the top 5 in attendance every single year. So we have a really good fan base that comes to a lot of games.
And I can confirm that. We live down the road from George Mason. This is a major Division I school, 37,000 undergrads, probably 300 to 500 people show up at every baseball game. And I apologize to anybody from Mason watching this. It's a very nice high school field, is how I would describe their stadium, versus someplace like LSU or Mississippi State or Arkansas or even like UCLA. These places are very nice minor league stadiums, is how I would describe it. Also, the weather, because we were talking before the interview, college baseball starts in mid-February. And yes, if you live far enough south, there are home games during that time of the year. It can be 38 degrees and windy during these games sometimes, and they happen. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing. We've had opening days where it's been 75, and we've had opening days where it's been, 25. And it's sometimes a unique thing early in the season, what you're going to get, and, how cold it's going to be in those cases.
So the next time everybody visits Fayetteville, sees Clint, sees Michelle, sees Rick, you got to go to a baseball game. Make sure you time it so you can do that.
Absolutely.
The other question that we ask everybody when they come on Director's Cut is their origin story with ASCE and GI. It is our 30th anniversary. ASCE's 175th is coming up soon. We're doing a lot of looking back. Clint, how did you first get involved with ASCE and GI?
When I first started, I'm like most U.S. undergrads, the student chapter of ASCE at Arkansas. I got involved with that and kind of played around. We did concrete bowling with one of my good friends as part of the ASCE kind of competition group for various things. So that was really my first kind of introduction to that, was with the student chapter. And as I grew into my grad school, I can remember the 2010 Geo Florida was the first, GI conference that I wrote a paper for. That I didn't get to go. I ended up doing field work in Alaska as a result of that. We were doing work in that, so and it was still February, like normal, February, March. So it was a little cold in Alaska compared to Florida, but we collected some interesting data as a result of that. A little icy outside, but after that, pretty much every year that I've been kind of associated with or went to the GI conferences, the annual conference. So, they're a pretty unique conference. I encourage everyone to go. I've still got my GI beanie from Minnesota that I keep in my truck. So, that's a pretty useful thing.
We like that it's with you everywhere you go. I mean, that first time that you did get to go, so we'll take 2010 out of the equation. Do you remember what your thoughts were when you walked into the conference? So what was amazing about it to you, and or things you didn't like? We'll hear those too, but we want to hear about the amazing stuff first.
Yeah, it's all kind of getting used to it. I was very surprised, the technical presentations, going in there and kind of listening to them and listening to people talk, and then, people telling me, well, you don't have to sit through the entire, 5 sessions or whatever. You can move around if you want to. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds like a good deal. But yeah, I mean, I was always impressed by kind of what was put on in those cases and all the unique activities outside of the conference main venue. So that was unique. The GI always provides something unique and interesting to go to besides just the conference. So, but yeah, it was, and getting to see kind of people that, I'd read papers of and get to see them in person. That was an interesting kind of, I guess, deal for me in the beginning, at least.
We do try to make it unique every year. This year, of course, is our 30th anniversary and the 30th anniversary of Geo Congress. So for all you viewers, we'll be in Salt Lake City in March. If you haven't made plans already to join us there, you can do that. It's really easy. You go to geocongress.org. Registration is there, all the other information about the conference, and we hope we see you out in the mountains in March. It's December, as we mentioned up at the top of the show, and if people look at their calendars, they will also have known it's December already. We think we have an attentive audience out there. And Director's Cut specializes in nostalgia. It's what we do really well. Clint, what's your earliest holiday memory?
One of the memories, I guess, that I don't know if it sticks with me, but I think about is that, when I was not too awful young of a kid, of trying to hide behind the couch on Christmas Eve and catch Santa Claus coming down the chimney in those cases, and just trying to sit there as long as I could, and then eventually falling asleep. And that was kind of the, trying to.
Well, so a couple things here. I guess it didn't work because you didn't have the endurance that you needed. Did you wake up there in the morning, or did you somehow make it up to bed?
I think I gave up at some point. That just went up to bed. That I gave up the ship and didn't think I was going to get it done.
Did you have a specific time in your house that you were allowed to come back down to see the tree and the presents that were there?
No, I don't think so. I don't remember one that we were sitting there. We couldn't get out of bed before my parents or anything. That I don't remember that in any sense. So
that's a pretty sweet deal. Yeah. We had, I think, 6:00 was maybe the time that we had negotiated. And then it's kind of funny because as you get older, the battle becomes like, I don't really want to get up at 6:00. Like, this is, I get to sleep in. There's nothing else going on. That was pretty good. I liked that. But 6:00 was kind of fun. I enjoyed that. Wow, that's a good one. That's a good one. It's very ambitious. I would have been terrified to try that. I think I would have been afraid that Santa was going to see me and would somehow punish me for trying to do that. So I'm impressed.
Well, at that point, I was in the realm of not sure that Santa Claus was real in that case and trying to prove that he was or wasn't, But,
very scientific of you, testing that theorem there. I like that. So, not only because you've studied this seismic zone do we have to ask this, you kind of live in the New Madrid seismic zone. For people who are unaware, I guess this is something we have to explain to them first, what it is, and then the question that's going to follow that is, what are 3 things that people should know about the New Madrid seismic zone?
So New Madrid seismic zone is a series of faults, 2 faults that are located between kind of Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, Missouri, kind of in that area. that produced some famous earthquakes in 1811 and 1812, that major earthquakes, so above 7, 7.5, 8, depending on who you're talking to and who's estimating, that, at the time of 1811, 1812, there wasn't much out in Arkansas or around that area. So it wasn't much damage, that could be sown, but, rung church bells in Boston in those cases, that, very famous stories of, these major ground motions that people felt a really long way away. So as a result, there's a major seismic hazard. And, one of the things that people should know is that that hazard is real, that's not something that, we're just making up, that we do expect earthquakes to occur in the future on the New Madrid seismic zone. And when we do have an earthquake, it'll be a pretty devastating earthquake, unfortunately. But for people that are, normal people living in those areas, that, if you're living in an unreinforced masonry building or working in one, be careful in those cases, that those are very dangerous buildings for people living in seismic areas. So, but I guess one of the other things is, from an engineering standpoint, or telling engineers in that case, is that we have many of the tools to sit there and make measurements in the New Madrid seismic zone. That for site response analysis, we can make measurements, surface wave measurements, non-invasive measurements, down to, thousands of meters below the surface, and be able to measure those soil properties in order to input and better understand what your seismic hazard or risk would be in those cases for future buildings. So we have the ability to do those things, and those should be used on projects if it's beneficial to those. And, some of the research that we've done in the area for RDOT, so looking at bridges and how we can benefit from doing things like site response in the Mississippi embayment, there's some pretty significant benefits that are associated with that, and doing more detailed seismic hazard analysis or site response analysis for some of these projects. And I think we do have the ability. It's not as commonly thought of as it is in California, that, we don't have quite the recurrence period that California has. They get shaken quite a bit. It's on the news all the time that they have a small magnitude of 4 or 5 or 3 or in those cases. But in the New Madrid seismic zones, we just don't have that common of earthquakes. So it's not happening on a year-to-year basis. So people tend to forget about it or put it in the back of their mind that there's seismic hazard out there that you should be concerned about. I know there's a lot of work being done in schools and other places to try to educate the public on, hey, this is what we could get. And I don't think it's quite to the point. So one of the unique things that came out of New Zealand when we did the earthquake reconnaissance is everybody started to learn the engineering terms, like liquefaction. Everybody knew what that was after the earthquakes. Everybody was very familiar with it. And, that we expect a lot of liquefaction in a New Madrid seismic zone earthquake. So I feel like that similarly, people will learn. It would be better if we could educate them beforehand on what these things are and what the effects will be on infrastructure, what the effects will be on public, and just, life in general when there's a large magnitude earthquake in the area.
So let's talk about communication specifically with policymakers. I mean, in my previous life, this is what I did. And I remember specifically in the mid-2000s trying to communicate the seismic risks around the New Madrid zone, but also in Charleston, South Carolina, to members of Congress. And I think and staffs, for a lot of them, it just didn't make any sense. This is a isolated event that happened almost 200 years ago at that time. Why should I care about it? I feel like in our experience, it was a lot different communicating to the public than it was communicating to elected officials. And I know you've had this experience as well. So what are the challenges for you specifically communicating with that group?
I think seeing like real world examples, and I've had the unique experience of going to these earthquake zones after major earthquakes. So seeing kind of the damage that's associated with it, the problems that it creates, And I think that's kind of a separation, is you often don't see those, especially in the New Madrid seismic zone. We don't have enough earthquakes to really shake people and get them thinking about, okay, we have a small magnitude earthquake, a 5 or a 6, and it causes some damage. That starts to open people's eyes to, okay, we need to do something about this. And so, more earthquakes isn't always kind of a better thing, but it also sits there and puts it on people's forefronts.
Yes.
It's unfortunately like seeing hurricanes or tornadoes in those cases. The more you see them, the more you're kind of aware of them, and the more you take the risk seriously in that case.
A good answer. We are down to our final 2 questions here. And this is one that I've never asked anybody, and it's a good one, and I'm not sure why. And you've got a little spin on it, so I like this. You've done a lot of earthquake reconnaissance in the past. Sometimes that takes you to some crazy out-of-the-way places. What's the worst place or time you've ever had a device run out of juice?
Now, as far as juice, it's more data plans in those cases. So when I was very early on, depending on your carrier and stuff, you had limited data when you were traveling internationally. And I remember, a time in Mexico City after the earthquake that we were far down south of where Mexico City was, kind of closer to the epicenter after the 2019 earthquake. And it got down someplace where I wasn't sure where we were. I knew we needed to go north to get back to Mexico City, but my phone was sitting there going so slow because I was out of data, and I couldn't, it was difficult to even get it to load enough where I could buy more data. But so that's a problem within itself, to just get it to load the maps where it could sit there and tell me kind of where do I need to go to get back. And, I sit there and struggled with it for 10 or 15 minutes because I was confused about why it wasn't loading anything, because I thought it was my cell phone reception at the time. But we eventually got to driving and kind of making our way back to where we thought it should be, and finally got my data to come back and buy some more data and figure out where we were. But I was a little worried at one point about being able to find my way back to where it was, because I certainly wasn't very familiar with Mexico City. And if you've ever drove in Mexico City, it's a big place. It's got lots and lots of roads. And even if after like day 5 of driving through there and going back the same way to my hotel, I'd always get confused about which way we were supposed to do, because there's 4 or 5 exits really close to each other, which one you were supposed to take. And after you did the roundabout coming off the Cloverleaf, which lane you need to get in and how you need to get over there. So, it was definitely a requirement to have some sort of GPS and have some sort of guidance.
After that first experience, did you have any really creative solutions that you came up with to make sure it didn't happen again? I mean, because it's hard to remember these days now. When this was a thing, for me, it was figuring out how to tether my phone to Wi-Fi. The first time I learned I could do that, that became like the lifeline. Then you had to find the Wi-Fi, right? And that kind of became your mission in life, to be able to do that so that you could function. What did you guys do?
A lot of times we would take a handheld GPS and load maps on it. So you could load street maps on that handheld GPS, and that would get you by in kind of a pinch. It's not a very good screen, but at least it would kind of get you pointed in the right direction in those cases. But I mean, definitely your phone's a lot easier with Google Maps, and you can put in pins of these different locations on there. I mean, I feel for the folks that did reconnaissance before smartphones and before good networks and maps, that using paper maps to try to get around and figure things out was challenging.
I can only imagine. I mean, because what you were saying sounds primitive now, but it was way more primitive than that, only a few years earlier.
Absolutely. GPS has made it very, very useful for earthquake reconnaissance efforts and being able to track where you're at and take good notes on things. So you can imagine the notes you had to take back then about the location of everything you saw, instead of just putting in a pen and
yes,
writing that down, you're done.
Not having to be observant anymore. It makes it a little bit easier to just go on
pictures
autopilot.
too. I mean,
Yes.
pictures are geolocated now, so on your iPhone. So, man.
So with our final question, we're sort of going to come full circle. We talked in the first question about, I mentioned it hasn't been that long since you were out of grad school, but it's starting to get to the point where you would say a while maybe. What things have already changed in graduate education? And we can go specific to civil or geotech here since you finished grad school. And what would you like to change if you could? This is one of these big, broad questions that we like to close with. And I like to ask professors these questions because you guys have a lot less risk in answering things like that. So, Clint, give us your proposals.
Things that changed, I mean, looking at it from a broad point of view, is very much online, flexible teaching in those cases, or hybrid teaching where you can teach or provide online lectures if you need to. That used to, you had to cancel class and either get somebody to teach for you, but you can provide an online lecture. And then for me, it's like the flexibility of students now. So I can record all my classes just as Arkansas's got a great system that just lets you record every class. And you can provide it to students. So it's awesome for graduate students who have to go out in the field or go to a conference in those cases and be able to sit there and, see those lectures. Because I can remember missing lots of classes when we were doing field work, and I just miss a week's worth of class and try to get notes from somebody to understand what we were going over or what I missed. So that's definitely something that's advanced, but more towards geotechnical engineering. Something that I see more and more is like programming. And it's interesting with AI and the confluence of programming and AI, and whether you need to, how well you need to learn programming and understand those. But big data has become such an issue. So all of our data acquisition systems can collect so many data points all at once. The ability to deal with those often requires some amount of programming in order to get it into a software or something that you can manipulate. And we're often doing things that are not just generic or kind of state of the practice work in those cases, but how do you manipulate that data? And that's become more and more useful, interesting across the board, is all these big data sets, especially for time histories that we record using sensors in that case for earthquake engineering or surface wave testing. So taking that data and, graduate students needing to learn more and more about programming. And I'm glad that schools or, middle schools, high schools are starting to get into that more, that teaching programming to their students so that they can learn that and have those skills kind of coming into graduate school. Those are kind of powerful tools that I sit there and see people do. But, as far as future things and what I would want to see, for geotechnical engineering, I want to focus and see more on uncertainty, and how do we sit there and bring uncertainty into kind of our general teaching, because that's often a huge issue with geotechnical engineering, is that we don't just get one value. I mean, it's not, you don't get A36 seal and that the signal Y is 36 KSI. That's, across the board for a lot of our engineering properties. For geotech, we have to determine those properties, and there's often quite a bit of uncertainty. And, for our undergraduates especially, oftentimes we kind of gloss over some of those things, that we mention it, but it's not as direct in terms of, here's a data set, what do you do with all these numbers? They all kind of give you a little bit different answer. Which ones do you use? How do you consider that uncertainty in a meaningful way? That's often things that we get into with surface wave testing, is how do we consider that uncertainty in surface wave testing? How do we sit there and take that information or a lot of these answers we get and pass it along? And I still see that on projects we work on with people of, okay, this is what we did, and this is the uncertainty we provided. And people sometimes came back and like, well, we're used to getting like one shear wave velocity profile. That's what we're used to. Like, how do we deal with this? Like, you gave us, 10 or 1,000 possible, or you gave us a range in those cases of what we can do. How do we sit there and deal with that? And I think that's good to kind of start that in the graduate school world and move that up to where people are more used to, here's a lot of different ranges, or here are possibilities that we can get into, and how do you account for that in future analyses? How do you carry that through the initial analysis all the way to kind of the end product that you get? So I think that's the way I see a lot of the industry going. So I think it's good to kind of get that in the graduate education world, and hopefully students will be more familiar with it and not as intimidated by those.
So I want to close with this. It goes back to a couple of things you said in that answer, and it's talking about data analysis. I think, one of the issues with big data early on was obviously you've got a lot more data points, right? But it's very easy to get distracted by outliers and maybe spend unnecessary time looking at that. How do you feel like, big data, I guess that phrase probably started getting thrown around in more mainstream ways about 15 years ago. How do you feel like data analysis has progressed since then? That, it's great that we're able to see these things that we weren't able to before, but sometimes we don't need to see those things. Like, do you feel like we've made progress on that front?
Some cases I think we have made progress in terms of how do we utilize a lot of these data points in those cases, but in others I feel like we're still using old school methods. And, that's not necessarily bad, that sometimes the old school methods produce results that are just as accurate as the latest machine learning model that we've created, or, maybe there's a 5% increase in accuracy for some advanced machine learning model, or, so I think there's, advancement to grow in that case, but I think there's interesting areas for uncertainty in how we can grow that and grow our understanding of how to deal with those.
Oh, it's really good. Thanks for that blueprint. And I hope we had influential people watching who will take away something from that. Clint, you made it through all 10 questions. You made it through the follow-ups. We talked about college baseball for the first time in a really long time on Director's Cut. That was exciting. First time we ever talked about the New Madrid seismic zone. And by the way, people, do not say New Madrid. That's important. But anyway, Clint, you did a great job today. For our viewers, if you liked what you saw, and you're here at the end, so you probably did, again, you should click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we'll let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. Clint, thank you for coming on and doing this today, and for all the great answers.
All right. Thanks absolutely for having me.
For all of our viewers, again, we've got almost 250 episodes now of Director's Cut. You can go back and catch them all on the YouTube channel, maybe watch some other stuff while you're there, get ready for your holiday break, and maybe binge watch some stuff. I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just saying you could if you wanted to. But as for us, we will see you with another brand new episode of Director's Cut next week.
Looking